Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Business. Today, I want to talk about something that sits much deeper than any reports or climate targets, something we usually start discussing from the wrong end. When the topic of energy comes up, we almost automatically jump to emissions, to CO2 numbers, to targets set for 2030 or 2050. But none of that really explains how we ended up here. So it doesn't explain why modern civilization became so deeply dependent on burning things in the first place. So today, I would like to slow this conversation down, not to debate solutions yet and not to talk about alternatives, but simply to understand the logic that brought us here. Because once you understand how fuel entered the system, you also begin to understand why living it is so difficult. Okay, so if we go far enough back, energy had nothing to do with oil, coal, or gas. For most of human history, energy was personal and immediate. It was your own body powered by food. Sunlight became calories through plants and animals, and those calories became movement. So you moved because you had eaten, and when the food was scarce, movement stopped. Energy was local, limited, and impossible to ignore. Cause and effect were always visible. If you were tired, energy was gone. If winter was harsh, survival was uncertain. And then, at some point, humans learned how to control fire. This moment is far more important than we usually admit. Fire didn't just bring warmth or protection. What it really introduced was the idea that energy could be stored. That energy could exist independently of the exact moment it was needed. For the first time, humans were no longer bound entirely to the present. Stored energy meant planning, it meant surplus, it meant the ability to think in terms of tomorrow and not just today. This is where the economic logic of energy quietly begins. And once a society experiences that shift, there is no real way back. For centuries after that, wood became the backbone of civilizations, and that's the energy system that time. It heated homes, cooked food, powered early industry, and made metalworking possible. Entire economies were structured around access to timber. But there is a part of the story that is often overlooked. Wood also produced the first major energy crisis. By the 16th and 17th century, large parts of Europe were running out of forests. England is one of the clearest examples. A growing navy required ships. Expanding cities required construction. Iron production consumed enormous amounts of timber. Forests simply could not regenerate fast enough. By the late 1600s, wood was no longer cheap or abundant. It became an important source. And scarcity has a very specific effect on systems. It forces change. Coal didn't replace wood because it was cleaner or more ethical. It replaced wood because wood stopped working. The system needed a different input to survive, and this is a pattern that will repeat again and again. And energy transitions rarely begin with the ideals. They begin when the existing solution can no longer support the system built on top of it. By the late 18th century, coal became the foundation of the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines, factories, and railways transformed societies at a speed humanity had never experienced before. What coal offered was scale. Its energy density allowed production to grow beyond the limits of human and animal labor. Economic growth was no longer constrained by muscle or daylight. Productivity exploded, but coal also introduced a deeper shift. It created distance between people and the consequences of energy use. Smoke disappeared into the sky, ash ended up somewhere else. Energy became something abstract, something you consumed without seeing its full cost. This abstraction made expansion easy. Growth could accelerate without immediate feedback. This is the moment when the logic of fuel truly hardens, and energy becomes an invisible engine of continuous economic expansion. Then came oil, and with it, another fundamental change. Unlike coal, oil was liquid, portable, and extremely energy dense. By the early 20th century, oil became the fuel that enabled movement at scale. Cars, ships, aviation, and mechanized armies all depended on it. The two world wars were not only industrial conflicts, they were fuel driven conflicts. Access to oil shaped strategies, alliances, and outcomes. And if you pause for the moment, it becomes clear that globalization as we know it would not exist without oil. Cheap transportation allowed supply chains to stretch across continents. Goods could move faster and cheaper than ever before. Just in time logistics became normal. Oil didn't just power machines, it reshaped the structure of the global economy. It gave us speed. Natural gas entered the system later, often presented as a compromise. It burned more cleanly, produced less visible pollution, and was more efficient for heating and electricity generation. By the mid 20th century, gas was widely framed as a cleaner fossil fuel. And at a local level, that framing wasn't entirely wrong. Cities became less polluted and air quality improved. But globally, nothing fundamental changed. Extraction continued, combustion continued. The broader consequences remains externalized. The logic of fuel stayed the same, only the optics improved. Then came the moment that shattered the sense of stability. In 1973, the oil embargo turned energy into a geopolitical weapon. Prices spiked, supply chains broke down, and the entire economy stalled almost overnight. This moment is critical to understand because this is where the modern energy transition actually begins. Not with environmental concern, but with the fear of dependency, fear of instability, fear of losing control over something that had become essential to economic functioning. Energy efficiency programs followed. Strategic reserves were built, diversification became a priority. The goal was not decarbonization, the goal was security. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, energy policy remained largely economic. Governments focused on stabilizing supply, reducing dependence, and controlling costs. Climate science was developing in parallel. The IPCC was established in 1988, and awareness of global warming slowly increased. But it wasn't yet the driver of decision making. The Kyoto Protocol, signed in 1997, carried symbolic importance. Economically, however, it changed very little. The real shift came later. After the global financial crisis of 2008, long term systemic risk entered the conversation in a serious way. Questions about stranded assets, infrastructure vulnerability, and assurance exposure became impossible to ignore. So at this point, climate stopped being only an environmental issue, it became a financial parameter. And the Paris Agreement in 2015 reinforced this shift, not as a moral declaration, but as a market signal. Capital markets began to reprice risk, banks, insurers, and investors adjusted their models, not out of ideology, but because uncertainty carries a cost. So today, much of the discussion focuses on optimizing fuel use. Slower speeds, better routing, different blends. These measures matter, but they don't change the underlying structure. As long as the system is built around combustion, optimization only reduces intensity. It doesn't eliminate the problem. We are still burning just a little more efficiently. So, when we talk about energy, it's worth pausing for the moment, not to debate technologies, targets, or timelines, but to look at the pattern underneath all of it. Again and again, we measure what systems deliver today: megawatts, terawatts, hours, efficiency ratios, and far less often we ask what they leave behind tomorrow. Because what we usually call progress is often a trade across time. Effects are moved forward, consequences are pushed outward, and the system keeps working just long enough for the cost to disappear from the view. We don't produce clean energy, we trade impacts today for waste tomorrow. And the real question has never been whether we do this. The real question is who ultimately pays for the consequences and how consciously that choice is made. This was Beyond the Business, and thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.